Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. My happiness isn't your responsibility, she said, staring at me across the table with that icy calm that only comes when someone has rehearsed the line. It was late, the kind of night when everything feels heavier, and her words landed like a door slamming shut. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just said it, like it was the most natural truth in the world. But for me, that was the moment something broke. For years, I had been the one bending, adjusting, making sacrifices to keep the balance. I worked long hours, covered bills, canceled nights out with friends just to make sure she felt secure. I believed that was love, showing up, even when it cost me. And I thought she saw it, that deep down she understood the weight I carried for both of us. But that night, when she said she didn't have to make me happy, I realized just how one-sided everything had been. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her how unfair it was or list out all the things I'd done. Instead, I went quiet, because something inside me had shifted. If she truly believed she had no responsibility for my happiness, then she was about to find out what it felt like when hers no longer mattered to me either. The days that followed looked ordinary on the surface. Breakfast, work, dinner, bed. But underneath, everything was different. I stopped asking her about her day. I stopped checking in when she was late from work. I stopped filling the silence with comfort she hadn't earned. At first, she seemed relieved, almost smug, as if she had won some invisible battle. She scrolled her phone during dinner, laughed at messages from friends, and barely noticed that my eyes no longer followed her. But silence has a way of creeping in slowly, tightening its grip. Within a week, she started asking why I was so quiet. I told her nothing was wrong. I smiled, calm, distant, and let her sit with the unease. She stayed up later at night, tossing and turning, while I slept soundly for the first time in years. One evening, I came home and found her sitting on the couch, arms crossed, clearly waiting for me. She said she felt like I was slipping away. I only nodded, took off my jacket, and went upstairs. No fight, no explanation, just absence. And that's when I saw it, the first crack in her armor. She had wanted freedom from responsibility, and now she had it. What she didn't realize was how cold that freedom would feel once my warmth was gone. She thought my happiness didn't matter. Soon, she would understand what it meant when hers stopped mattering to me. The first week of silence passed like a test neither of us admitted was happening. She thought I'd eventually crack, that I'd go back to chasing her moods, trying to decode what would make her smile again. But I didn't. I went to work, came home, ate my meals, and lived like her presence was just part of the furniture. There, but not essential. At first, she leaned into it. She spent more time on her phone, more nights out with friends, coming back with perfume that wasn't hers and laughter that didn't belong to me. Normally, I would have asked questions, searched her eyes for the truth, maybe even begged for clarity. This time, I didn't ask a single thing. I simply noted the changes, filed them away, and carried on with my own plans. That shift unnerved her. One evening, she tried to pick a fight, accusing me of being distant. I looked at her calmly and said, "I thought my happiness wasn't your responsibility." The words hit harder than I expected. They stopped her mid-sentence. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it again, silent. I walked away, leaving her to wrestle with her own words. Over the next few days, I began building a life outside her. I stayed late at work, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I joined a small group at the gym, started running with them after hours. The sweat, the air, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement, it all reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of joy without her. I came home later, calmer, stronger, and when she asked where I'd been, I answered simply, busy. Her reactions grew sharper. One night she slammed the dishes into the sink, muttering under her breath. Another night she sat in the living room waiting for me, her arms folded tight, her eyes searching mine for something familiar. But she didn't find it, because the man she had known, the one who lived to fix her moods, was gone. By the second week, she wasn't as confident. She started asking if I still loved her. I didn't answer with words. I kissed her forehead like you would a stranger's child and went upstairs. That small gesture said everything. Respect, but no devotion. She was no longer the center. And in that silence, she began to see what she had created, a life where her happiness no longer dictated mine. And the more she realized it, the more unsettled she became. By the third week, the silence between us had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just an absence of words. It was a mirror. Every time she looked at me, she saw herself reflected back, and she didn't like what stared at her. I could feel her unraveling in the smallest ways. She lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, waiting for me to ask about her day. She followed me into the living room and sat close, hoping I'd reach for her hand. When I didn't, her breathing shifted, shallow and uneven, like the air itself was pressing down on her. One night, she finally cracked. I was sitting at the table, eating in silence, when she blurted out that she didn't recognize me anymore. Her voice trembled as she asked if I was punishing her. I set down my fork, looked at her calmly, and reminded her, "You said my happiness wasn't your responsibility." I listened. Her lips parted, but no words came. The truth hung heavy in the room, suffocating, undeniable. I finished my meal and walked away, leaving her staring at the empty chair across from her. Around that time, I started to notice something different in myself. I wasn't just detached, I was lighter. I felt stronger, more focused, more alive than I had in years. I poured my energy into work, into exercise, into old hobbies she once mocked me for. I pulled my guitar out of the closet, strummed chords until my fingers ached, rediscovering the sound of freedom in the strings. I spent less time in the house and more time outside, breathing air that didn't carry her moods. She noticed. She asked where I'd been, who I was with, what I was doing. I answered in the shortest possible way: out, busy, living. Each word cut deeper than any fight could have, because it showed her that I didn't owe her explanations anymore. That shift terrified her. One evening, I came home late to find her sitting in the dark, waiting. She asked if I still cared, if I was really willing to let her slip away. I looked at her, steady, unreadable, and said, "You let go first." Then I went upstairs, leaving her in silence thick enough to drown in. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. She was beginning to feel the weight of her own declaration. And for the first time, she was learning what it meant when her happiness no longer mattered to me either. By the fourth week, she was no longer hiding her unease. The arrogance that once dripped from her words was gone, replaced by hesitation. She moved carefully around me, testing, measuring, like she was trying to read a language she had never learned. I didn't make it easier. I answered what needed answering, did what needed doing, but nothing more. My silence was steady, sharp, and she felt every edge of it. One Friday evening, she dressed up, cooked dinner, and poured 2 glasses of wine. When I walked in, she smiled too brightly, her voice pitched higher than usual, asking if I wanted to sit and eat together. I looked at the table, then at her, and said I already had dinner. Her smile cracked instantly, like glass under pressure. I walked past her, put my bag down, and went upstairs. Behind me, I heard the clink of the wine glass as she slammed it on the table. That night, she tried again. She came into the bedroom later than usual, slipping under the sheets and pressing close to me. In the past, I would have melted into it, grateful for the smallest scrap of attention. But not anymore. I stayed still, my body calm, my breathing even. She shifted once, twice, then finally pulled away, rolling to the edge of the bed. The silence between us was louder than any rejection I could have spoken. By Saturday morning, she broke the routine. She sat across from me at breakfast and asked why I was treating her like a stranger. Her voice cracked when she said it, like she already knew the answer. I looked at her evenly and said, "Because that's what you wanted." No anger, no heat, just truth. She didn't argue. She just lowered her eyes, staring at the untouched food in front of her. Meanwhile, I kept changing. My circle grew wider. I reconnected with old friends, filled my weekends with things she had once called a waste of time. Music, running, even late-night drives with no destination. Every mile I put between myself and her moods reminded me how much I had sacrificed, and how little she had valued it. By the end of that week, she wasn't the woman who told me my happiness wasn't her responsibility. She was quieter, restless, unsettled, like someone who had lost a game she didn't know she was playing. And I realized something. She was starting to understand the weight of her own words. She had built her comfort on my devotion. Now she was learning what it felt like when devotion was gone. By the 5th week, the balance had shifted so completely that it almost felt surreal. She wasn't the confident woman who once dismissed me with a sentence. She was restless, fragile, circling me with questions she didn't dare ask directly. I watched her shrink inside the silence she once believed she wanted. And I stayed steady, calm, untouchable. One evening, she tried a new tactic. She brought up counseling, something she had always mocked before. She said maybe talking to someone would help us, that maybe she hadn't realized how disconnected we had become. I looked at her and said, "You told me I wasn't your responsibility. Counseling won't change that." Her face dropped, the color draining like she'd been struck. I stood, rinsed my plate, and left her staring at the table. The following days, her desperation began leaking through her routine. She texted me during the day, something she rarely did before. "How's work? What time will you be home?" I made dinner. Simple words, but they were no longer casual. They were attempts to tether me, to draw me back into her orbit. I answered briefly, if at all. "Busy. Late. Okay." The silence between those words carried more weight than paragraphs ever could. By midweek, she was no longer hiding her panic. She followed me from room to room at night, sitting on the edge of the bed while I read, waiting for me to put the book down and give her attention. I didn't. I turned the page, calm and steady, until she finally gave up and lay down facing the wall. I could hear her breathing shift, uneven and restless, while mine stayed slow, measured, untouched. On Friday, I came home late from a run to find her sitting in the dark, eyes swollen from crying. She whispered that she felt invisible. I nodded once and said, "Now you know how I felt." Then I walked past her, showered, and went to bed. No argument, no comfort, no fight. Just the truth, delivered cold. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I no longer felt anger toward her. I felt distance, the kind of distance you can't come back from. She had drawn the line when she declared my happiness wasn't her concern. Now she was finally living inside the emptiness she created, and I wasn't planning to pull her out of it. By the 6th week, her behavior had shifted from irritation to desperation. The same woman who once looked me in the eye and told me she didn't know me happiness was now circling the house like a ghost, desperate for crumbs of acknowledgement. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock her. I simply observed her unraveling in silence. One night, she suggested a weekend away, just the two of us, as if a change of scenery would erase what had already broken. She said maybe we just needed to reset. I looked at her for a long moment, calm, unreadable, then shook my head. "You reset things the day you said my happiness didn't matter." Her face flushed, eyes darting away, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. She started trying smaller gestures, cooking meals she hadn't made in years, wearing clothes she knew I once liked, even putting her phone away at dinner, something she had never bothered with before. But the timing gave her away. These weren't acts of love, they were acts of fear. Fear of the new man sitting across from her, the man who no longer leaned on her moods to define his worth. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. I was spending more time outside the house, rebuilding connections, focusing on myself. Every hour I invested in my own growth was a reminder that I didn't need her validation anymore. And every hour she spent waiting for me was proof that she had lost the control she once bragged about. One evening, I returned late to find her sitting on the stairs, her face pale, her eyes red. She whispered that she didn't know who she was without me. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered how easily she had dismissed me, how casually she had stripped me of importance. That memory burned away the softness, leaving only clarity. I told her, "That's not my problem to fix." Then I stepped past her and went upstairs. That night, she cried quietly in the living room. I lay in bed, calm, steady, untouched by the sound. Not out of cruelty, but out of resolve. She was learning the lesson she had written for herself. When you decide someone's happiness doesn't matter, you can't expect yours to matter in return. And the more she realized it, the closer she came to breaking completely. By the 7th week, her desperation had settled into something heavier, fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the silence that surrounded us. She used to thrive in that silence, using it as a weapon, withholding affection to make me crawl back. But now, the silence belonged to me, and it was cutting her down piece by piece. One night, she came into the bedroom while I was reading. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, like a child caught in the wrong room. Finally, she asked if I hated her. I set my book down, looked at her, and said calmly, "No, I feel nothing." Her eyes widened, as if nothing was worse than hate. Because hate still meant there was fire. Nothing meant the fire had burned out completely. She tried to close the distance then, sitting beside me, reaching for my hand. But I didn't move. I let her hand linger in the air for a moment before she pulled it back, her shoulders collapsing. She left the room without another word. The sound of her footsteps down the hall carried more defeat than any argument could have. Meanwhile, I was changing faster than she could keep up. I was sharper at work, more focused, more alive. I started picking up projects I'd ignored for years, rediscovering the parts of myself I had buried under the weight of her moods. I wasn't rebuilding for her, or to prove anything. I was rebuilding for me, and that was what scared her most. By the weekend, she broke again. She sat across from me at breakfast, her eyes swollen, her hands trembling around a coffee mug. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, that she felt like I had disappeared even though I was right there. I told her, "Now you know how I lived for years." No anger, no shout, just the truth dropped like ice into water. She froze, her lip trembling, and then looked away. That night, she stayed up late, pacing the hallway. I heard her stop outside the bedroom door more than once, as if she wanted to come in and say something. But she never did. She just stood there in silence, suffocating in the very emptiness she once told me to accept. And I realized then, she wasn't fighting for love anymore. She was fighting for control. And that was a battle she had already lost. By the 8th week, the tension in the house was suffocating, but not for me, for her. I had grown comfortable in the silence, steady in my detachment. She, on the other hand, was unraveling. The woman who once declared she didn't owe me happiness now hovered at the edges of my life, desperate for scraps of acknowledgement. One evening, I came home to find the living room spotless, candles lit, and dinner waiting. She was dressed up, her makeup done carefully, her smile trembling at the edges. She said she wanted to try again, that maybe we could rebuild what we'd lost. Her voice wavered as she told me she was willing to put in the effort now. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You don't get to rebuild something you chose to burn." Her smile collapsed, and she sat down heavily, staring at the untouched plates of food. The truth was, she wasn't fighting for us. She was fighting for herself, for the comfort, the stability, the control she used to have. But what she didn't understand was that the man she thought she could control no longer existed. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was free. And that freedom was something she couldn't stand. Over the next few days, her behavior grew more erratic. She hovered in doorways, searching for conversation, waiting for me to give her some sign that she still mattered. When I didn't, she broke down. One night, she stood in front of me and asked if there was anything she could do to fix this. Her eyes were wet, her voice shaking. I told her calmly, "You can't fix what you destroyed with a sentence." Then I stood, walked past her, and left her crying in the quiet house. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I had come. I wasn't the man begging for affection anymore. I wasn't the one carrying all the weight. I was lighter, stronger, untethered. She, on the other hand, was drowning in the silence she once weaponized. And for the first time, I realized the outcome was already decided. She had thought my happiness was irrelevant. Now, her own unhappiness consumed her, and there was nothing left for me to do but watch her sink into the emptiness she had chosen. By the 9th week, the transformation was undeniable. She was no longer the woman who spoke with certainty, who dismissed me as though my needs were trivial. She was hollow, restless, reduced to watching me from across the room as if waiting for a signal that would never come. I moved through the house with calm precision, my routine smooth and unbothered. She moved like a shadow, chasing moments that never arrived. One Saturday morning, I went for a run, the kind that cleared my head and reminded me of my own strength. When I came back, drenched in sweat and alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, I found her sitting on the steps, staring at the door like she had been waiting the entire time. She asked if I was happy. I took a sip of water, met her eyes, and said, "Yes." Nothing more. That single word hit harder than any speech I could have given. She lowered her gaze, her face pale, her lips trembling. Later that week, she tried to corner me again. She asked if I even remembered the good times, if I still believed in what we had once built. I told her calmly, I remember everything. That's why I know it's over. No shouting, no cruelty, just truth, plain and unshakable. She broke down, her shoulders shaking as she cried, asking what she was supposed to do without me. I didn't answer. I simply walked away, leaving her to sit in her own storm. Meanwhile, my life outside of her grew brighter. Friends began inviting me out more often. Work projects I had once dreaded now fueled me. I even started considering things I had put off for years: travel, new challenges, fresh beginnings. The more I stepped forward, the smaller she became in my world. And the more I let go, the tighter she tried to hold on. One evening, I came home to find a note on the table. It was a plea, written in shaky handwriting, full of apologies and promises. She wrote that she finally understood what she had lost, that she couldn't bear the silence anymore. I folded the paper neatly, set it aside, and went upstairs without responding. Because by then, it was no longer about her regret. It was about my freedom. She had made her declaration, and I had honored it. My happiness was mine again, and hers, no matter how much she begged, was no longer my concern. The final week didn't explode with drama, it collapsed with silence. By then, she was a shell of the woman who had once spoken with certainty, declaring that my happiness was not her responsibility. Now, she lived in the echo of those words, and every day the weight of them dragged her lower. One evening, I walked into the house after work and found her sitting in the living room with her suitcase by her side. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, her hands trembling as she gripped the handle. She looked at me like she wanted me to stop her, to beg her to stay. But I didn't move. I hung up my jacket, set down my keys, and poured a glass of water. The silence stretched between us until it was unbearable. Finally, she whispered that she couldn't live like this anymore, that she couldn't stand being invisible in her own home. I nodded slowly, calm, steady. You were the one who chose this. I just listened. The words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She lowered her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks, and stood. Without another word, she wheeled her suitcase to the door. I didn't follow. I didn't ask where she was going or what she would do. I let the sound of the door closing mark the end. No explosion, no final scene, just silence, sharp and absolute. That night, I sat alone in the house, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought about the journey, the man I had been, the sacrifices I had made, the way I once measured my worth by her moods. That man was gone. In his place was someone stronger, calmer, untouchable. She had wanted freedom from responsibility, and in giving it to her, I had claimed my own. Weeks later, I heard from a friend that she regretted everything, that she told people she had thrown away something she didn't realize was priceless. But her regret no longer belonged to me. It was hers to carry and mine to leave behind. Because in the end, she was right. Her job was never to make me happy. That was my responsibility. And once I reclaimed it, I discovered something she never expected. Life without her wasn't emptiness. It was liberation. And that silence she left behind, it wasn't a void. It was peace. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.